Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this session this morning. It's part of MusicTT's Reverb experience. My name is Gerry Williams, Creative Director and founder of New Fire Festival, which is a premier sustainable lifestyle and cultural festival in the Caribbean. Um, Today, or this session, we're going to be discussing festivals going green. And we're going to be joined by, or we are joined by three other panelists. I'm going to introduce them shortly. In fact, I'll introduce them right now. So we have Vanessa David, who is the lead dreamer and doer of Global Villages Development Consultants and co-founder of Rooks Americas. And she's also a co-creator of the Edge Effect podcast. So you're going to hear about that podcast and how you can participate in that. We have Rooks, who is a facilitator and founder of JTB Homesteads, who is also a co-creator of the Edge Effect podcast. And Anne-Marie is joining also and going to be speaking in her capacity or from her experience personally as our waste management coordinator at New Fire Festival, her organization JTB Homestead being one of our collaborating entities. And then we have Sean McCoon, who is a manager at Environment Tobago, and who also is involved in the organizing of the Friendship Festival. So fellow panelists, after some technical glitches, you guys know I'm not savvy at this stuff. We finally got it sorted out. I want to apologize to everyone out there tuning in, but thank you for your patience. I just had some issues with the technology. I had mentioned to my fellow panelists that what I wanted to do was begin by laying out a philosophical sort of foundation for this panel. And that is going to require that I read something that I prepared, just so we have the philosophical and ideological understanding of why it's important that festivals and events generally adopt a more environmentally responsible approach to how they do things. So I'm going to start with this foundation, and then we are going to go through with the panelists giving an intro into where they are going to be speaking from as well, right? So historically, festivals have served as exposés of the culture of the people, of the places where they occur. But what is culture? The most succinct definition for culture is how we live. Culture is therefore the everyday lived expression of the collective values, beliefs, aspirations, attitudes, and behaviors of a people. So more than just a specific set of artistic or creative highlights on stage at the festival, there is a demonstration of the general culture of the people happening off stage. But culture is not static. It changes. Culture is not static. It changes. And it changes in relation to context and eventualities. Those changes are not always deliberate and are not always positive, but sometimes they are deliberately engineered and they have dire consequences. Our present-day global consumer culture is one that was deliberately engineered. And now the greatest threat facing humanity is a consequence of that engineered culture. The words of US economist and retailing analyst Philip Bowe in 1955 succinctly captures the thinking behind this cultural engineering, which commenced at that time and sums up the direction that global economic thinking and culture has taken ever since, congruent with the strategies promoted by the Council of Economic Advisors to President Eisenhower as the US was trying to ramp up its economy post-World War II. Bowe famously proclaimed in the Journal of Retailing, and I quote, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfaction and our ego satisfaction in consumption. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, discarded at an ever increasing rate." Doesn't that perfectly sum up our civilization's attitude towards consumer goods? Having developed and established the most sophisticated, robust, and effective mass media and telecommunications apparatus in the world, It was not long before that newly engineered US consumption culture spread throughout the world. This new culture is perhaps the most insidious development in the last 100 years within Western civilization, which has been waging war, perhaps unintentionally, upon our natural environments. It has helped to exponentially speed up the ravaging of our planet and has brought us to the threshold of the greatest threat to the lives and livelihood of the vast majority of humanity. A perfect storm of planet-wide ecological catastrophes, including climate change. And we have arrived here, even while the best of the destructive consumption culture is enjoyed only by a minority of the world's population at the expense of a majority. At the moment, the COVID-19 pandemic has captured all our attention only because the consequence or threat is immediate, obvious, and relatively specific. But the truth is that the pandemic as a threat to humanity pales in comparison to the brewing ecological cataclysm. However, while we were able to quickly mount an unprecedented global response to COVID-19 involving measures such as the complete shutdown of the global economy, which before the pandemic would have been considered as totally unrealistic and unthinkable, we seem rather reluctant and resistant to making even the basic changes that are required to overcome the greater threats. The necessary re-engineering from that consumption culture, the unprecedented paradigm transformation required of us to overcome this existential challenge has implications for all aspects of human society, all activities and all enterprises, and that includes the cultural creative sector, which includes cultural events. The massive importance of this transformation must be reflected in popular culture. It must be endorsed and championed by popular culture icons and must be reflected in our cultural activities, such as festivals. As was the case with our easy compliance with pandemic response, such as the shutdown of economies and the halting of social activities, I would hope that event organizers would just as easily agree to a call by a fellow industry practitioner to make our events ecologically responsible. It would be a shame to think that we would sooner abide with not having any festivals or cultural events at all than we would agree to endeavor to make our festivals and cultural events ecologically responsible. And that has many more direct and indirect benefits for society that I can begin to elaborate here. But I've always known the truth is, as was demonstrated by our easy compliance with state-driven pandemic response measures, that it is always with our government that the greatest potential for driving societal/national transformation lies. In the case of the pandemic, our government simply proclaimed new rules and laws and stated the consequences for disobedience, and everyone fell in line. The fact that they could utilize state powers to so responsibly direct people's behaviors mean that they could always use those powers to drive changes that are necessary for the meaningful transformation of society. All governments must act now in a manner that reflects an understanding of this crisis and an intention to be the leader in the needed transformation. However, I'm a firm believer in the idea that whenever our governments fail to provide leadership to secure the best interests of the people, it is the duty of the people to do what is necessary towards that object. And as it relates to this great crisis, I believe that in festivals and cultural events lie great potential for inspiring and catalyzing positive behavior change in our audiences and indeed the wider populace. Furthermore, I would say that it is especially at cultural events such as festivals that awareness of the crisis must be reflected and responsible leadership asserted, because these occasions provide the best opportunities to introduce, inspire, and reinforce the messages and call to action on this crisis on the part of the festival attendees. Therefore, whatever the characteristics of any festival in relation to the prevailing realities in the wider world, it is a reflection of the values, beliefs, and attitudes of the event organizers towards those realities. If the event organizers truly care about those realities, I believe it will be reflected in the event. Like the government and their use of state power in enforcing radical pandemic measures upon the society, the event organizer has the same level of power to direct behavior change in their patrons, even if only for the duration of the event. If the overall experience of the event is great and a person wants to attend it, they will abide by the rules. And I'm attesting to this from my experience with New Fire Festival. Therefore, festival and event organizers and artists too, need to act now in a manner that reflects an understanding of this crisis and that they are willing to use their influence to lead in the needed transformation. Now, there is a reason I mentioned earlier that our consumption culture is at the foundation of this great ecological crisis. I said that because the only way to solve the ecological crisis is to address the consumption culture. No amount of technologies, green, blue, or otherwise, will achieve what a change in behavior, indeed a change in culture, is going to accomplish. One of the most glaring ways in which this culture is wreaking havoc on our natural environments is the staggering volume of waste we generate, with which we pollute our natural environments. Unfortunately, festivals, popular cultural events, and social events generally are among the settings where we witness a direct expose of the unsustainable consumption culture, albeit limited to a narrow range of products. This problem manifests in the tremendous amount of disposable solid waste we see at the end or in the aftermath of our popular events. Additionally, connected to that waste, and this is very important, it's important to note that connected to all of that waste is a trail of carbon emissions and other industrial practices that are also destructive to the natural environment. Our attitudes towards consumption and waste at social events is a glimpse into the massive environmental problem that is critical to us, especially in the Caribbean, perhaps more than any other ecological problem. And it is the one we can immediately start to transform. While climate change is important, because it will have fundamental impacts on us as small island developing states, we are not the ones driving that problem. The large industrial nations with their massive carbon footprints and greenhouse gas emissions are. Our actual carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions are still relatively low. And while we should still address that because every drop counts, we must not get carried away and jump on the bandwagon of issues being trumpeted by the metropoles while neglecting what is even more relevant to us. We cannot be clamoring about climate change and carbon molecules in the sky while we are dumping actual waste, garbage, refuse all over our landscape and polluting our natural environment. According to a 2019 article in Forbes magazine, Caribbean islands are the biggest plastic polluters per capita in the world. The article went on to say the little island of St. Lucia, which produces the 6th largest amount of plastic waste per capita in the Caribbean, generates more than 4 times the amount of plastic waste per person as China, which is the largest plastic polluter in absolute terms, and is responsible for 1.2 times more improperly disposed plastic waste per capita than China. Further, the article says of the top 30 global polluters per capita, 10 are from the Caribbean region, and TNT is among that number. Some experts are predicting that by 2050, there could be as much plastics in the ocean as there are fish. Some of you might know about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Some of you may know about the garbage patch we have right here in the Caribbean Sea. These so-called garbage patches are veritable islands of floating plastic debris from waste discarded by humans gathered by ocean giants. Experts estimate that each year, almost 8 million metric tons of plastic waste ends up in the ocean, wreaking havoc on marine ecosystems and marine life of all sorts. We also know that you can hardly look at any canal, drain, or river in our countries and not see litter, trash of all kinds floating downstream, making their way to the ocean. And we also know that we're small islands surrounded by those same oceans that support traditional, potentially sustainable maritime enterprises. And we know that a large percentage of our population depends on those maritime enterprises for life and livelihood. We also know that these oceans, marine ecosystems, and coastline features are the main attractions at the foundation of our tourism industry, which is the main economic engine for so many of our economies. Yet we seem unable to connect the dots between our own negative behaviors related to consumption and waste and the erosion of the possibilities for truly sustainable economies and livelihoods. However, a golden opportunity is now before us to transform that unsustainable legacy. It is in this area of environmental damage that events and festivals can take the lead in helping to drive behavior change with our audiences. This is the area where events contribute to the problem, in my opinion, in the most direct and glaring way, the most significant way. And this is the area where New Fire Festival focuses energy and attention to addressing. We strive to reduce the use of disposable inorganic items in every aspect of our festival operation, from early in the planning stage, including in our planning meetings, in the promotion stage, in all the small events that we organize to promote the festival, and in the festival execution stage, from venue loading and setup to breakdown and load out. Also, every aspect of design for the built infrastructure, amenities, aesthetics, features, and every aspect of the festival experience is underpinned by a philosophy of aiming for zero waste. And this brings us, and I want to say this in closing, this brings us to Carnival, which is the premier national festival of TNT. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced 2-year hiatus on the beloved festival, which defines the culture of the nation. The truth is that in recent decades, Trinidad and Tobago Carnival has become a massive waste-generating festival. Best estimates from SwimCall states somewhere in the region of 1,000 truckloads of, if I remember correctly, 1,000 truckloads of additional waste goes to the landfills in the 3 days of Carnival itself, not to mention the entire season with all of the big events, all of the big fets, and the amount of waste that is generated in those. Now, we have this golden opportunity to rebrand TNT Carnival for its re-emergence after COVID-19. And we can rebrand TNT Carnival into a festival of the 22nd century, I would even say, that not only serves as a catalyst for initiating a transformation of the behavior of Trinidadians towards the environment, but also to recapture the attention and imagination of the rest of the world. Furthermore, and this is very important, the pandemic brought the global tourism industry to its knees. And post-pandemic, that industry will be extremely competitive. Therefore, transforming TNT Carnival is one way that the product can be made more attractive to a global audience that is growing more discerning. And we can really re-inspire people about Carnival. Greening Carnival will vastly improve the quality and value of the experience, and this can be played up in the marketing of the festival. But we have to be careful that it is not a greenwashing exercise. Let us seize this moment to initiate what I would describe as a metamorphosis of Trinidad and Tobago Carnival into a truly beautiful festival in all regards. And indeed, how we do events generally. I know that was a bit lengthy, and I thank you guys for listening through it. But I felt that it was very important that an understanding of how severe the problem is and why it's necessary that events become green. What I will do now is pass the mic, so to speak, to my other panelists for them to introduce the ideas that they would like, they will be presenting. And we're gonna start with Denyssa. Denyssa, you have the mic.
Thanks, Gerry, for setting context. So imagine this. Early 2000s, around the bridge in Port of Spain, minutes to 4 after pandemics, and there's this image that I wish I captured on film. Two older men were pushing a rack with 6 bases. They ran and pushed off, cruising with boxcart joy. I don't know if it was the cackling of one of them or the cacophony of the jumping basses and the wheel rumbling on the pitch that woke up a pattern. But Mister was vexed and started running down one of them and almost grazed his calf. So imagine these two older men at 4 a.m. enjoying the playfulness of that moment while a pattern is at their heels. That is the kind of magic that I love about the Panorama Festival and about this Caribbean space. In her keynote address, Dr. Till mentioned the importance of using the resources we have. And I find that there is so much magic when we think about how those same basses, those instruments which make sweet music, the soulfulness and the depth that touches your core, that these same basses were only discarded drums at some point in time. And yes, they were used to store water and as garbage bins, etc. But in the middle of a global depression in the 1930s, we took our waste and we created an instrument. And descriptions of that time bear some similarity to the global pandemic that we are experiencing. I think of how we feel in this moment, and I know that there are many people like me who at times don't feel motivated to do squat. And so many of us are internalizing all that is going on, and we are not even aware of it. In the 1930s, they were experiencing illness and death just like we are, unemployment and poverty, and they created an instrument. I don't know the real motivation behind this creation, but as we explore becoming more eco-responsible for festivals, it would be good to remind ourselves that we have a history of coming up with innovative solutions to transform our waste, even in the most depressing times. I grew up in a community, a rural community, Rio Claro, where we used to harry leaves as plates for festivals like Diwali. That was very common. We cut heliconias from the yard and they used heliconias to decorate the Catholic Church for Mass. It was a regular thing. So instead of purchasing new decorations, we used what we had. They were and are simple ways in which we have been and are eco-responsible in planning events. We had things like palm branches that were used to create privacy walls, and those were done out of necessity. Gerry would have mentioned the dangerous consumer culture that we are engulfed by. In many rural communities, we use the existing resources instead of purchasing new things. And that's something that we need to remind ourselves of. It's also a good reminder that even before the word sustainability and greening became buzzwords, we were doing it. And that is encouragement to not see the task of greening or reshaping our festivals as overwhelming. In 2019, through Global Villages Development Consultants, I was fortunate to guide a team for the greening of Carifesta held in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the things that I was clear about in the first workshop was that I was simply sharing suggestions, that I was not holding a big stick over them to comply. I was aware that the request was being done at the last minute and that it would be difficult to implement some of the things that were being suggested, like buying local produce to create the meals that they would sell. Many of them had already purchased raw materials, and you had contingents from Haiti and St. Lucia that had brought their own spices and provisions. So that's one of the things that in planning festivals that we have to bear in mind, the time factor, and to give ourselves enough lead time to educate and to get buy-in and to involve all stakeholders in planning. So coming out of that experience, I have to stress how useful it is to begin education about greening with all stakeholders weeks and possibly months before an event. What is even better is creating an online community of persons who can share information and about how we reduce our carbon footprint in our individual lives and in our homes. So the work of greening a festival really starts with each person in his or her daily life. 2 weeks before CariFesta in 2019, a green guide was included in the CariFesta manual and on the CariFesta app. And it included suggestions like carpooling and walking with reusable containers. There was also a separate green guide for vendors, so we would have suggested things like unplugging appliances that didn't need to be powered throughout the time there. We also conducted a workshop to inform food vendors of our plan to collect their fruit and vegetable scraps, and we shared tips for them about how they can reduce their overall carbon footprint for the festival and beyond. They were quite cooperative, and that material was actually used for composting in a community garden in Mayaro. We were very proud to have saved 40,000 single from the landfill. We had a hydration station, and we collected beverage containers through a partnership with EMA Eye Care. It was very easy. It's very easy for any organizer to decide to collect beverage containers to save them from the landfill, but not put things in place for the collection of the material. So it's important that the research is done to coordinate, to work out things like storage on site and collection, and to ensure that the next step is one which makes most sense. While it was not the case for CariFesta, one can very easily plan all of this and have plastic bottles end up disintegrating in a facility, as opposed to going to a company like Flying Tree to be converted to benches and tiles. So one of the things that we experienced on the first day was having janitors pick up the beverage containers and combine it with other garbage. So for efforts like these, it's important that we ensure that all stakeholders are aware of what we're doing and that they are involved in the planning. There were some additional lessons that I feel might be useful for event planners and decorators, etc. One of the things that we should ask ourselves is, what are the existing local green solutions which can be improved on for use? So I would have mentioned Sahari leaves, and there's this guy in Mayaro that uses palm plates, makes palm plates from material that he collects from his community for his roast fish business. That's an example of how we can use the resources that we have locally. One of the things that's also very important is communicating with compassion and communicating responsibly. If we are to engage stakeholders, then it's important to understand their language. So if we are engaging the private sector, for example, we need to use their language. For them, dollars and cents spent on greening must make sense. And an example would be a janitor. An eco-solution must be as or even easier than a regular practice for it to make sense for a janitor. And that's just the reality. Another thing that we noted during the CariFesta, for the CariFesta experience, is that if we chuck in environmental elements in our events, like last-minute invitations, they will be poorly received. So organizations which are interested in greening their events need to start with their own operations, and their interest should be genuine. They can partner with environmental organizations for support. And partnerships are important because one person or one organization really has all the answers. So if we collaborate, then we'll be able to source expertise from different persons. This crisis of humans not living in harmony with the earth is a byproduct of Western culture, which is largely imposing and dominant and quite oppressive. As we use the experience of this crisis and we look beyond the COVID-19 pandemic to reshape our sustainable festivals, we need to share information with party planners, event organizers, state agencies, and this should not be done with the same force or oppression as the very thing that created this crisis. We should be open to mutual exchange. Most people don't do differently because they either do not know anything different, it is not profitable, or it's not convenient. This means that we have to consistently share information and find ways to make alternative approaches more profitable and convenient. And that might look like encouraging more corporate entities to seriously consider funding greening initiatives to make it easier on event planners. There's a radical academic who I follow called Bayo Komolafe, who says that the crisis isn't how we manage the crisis. And I surely hope that we will make good use of both crises. Gerry, we're not hearing you. I think your mic may have gone again. So maybe Anne-Marie could share a bit about.
Yeah, I'll do.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Denyssa. And thank you, Gerry. And, hi, Sean. Yeah, my entry into the world of festivals began really with New Fire Festival as an active participant. And I have to say that I was very, thank you, Gerry, for including me in your panel. The whole notion of greening a festival is intriguing because I mean, everything was green at one time or the other, but now we have to reverse engineer a lot of what we do as a culture. But anyway, my involvement with New Fire Festival, it was started in 2016. My organization, JTB Homesteads, was founded, let's see, we registered that in 2014. And we began doing composting workshops and designing waste reduction workshops. And when I saw what Trinidad and Tobago Bridge Initiative was doing through New Fire Festival, I wanted to get involved. So in 2016, I was involved as a volunteer. And then from 2017 onwards, I became involved as a waste management, as part of the waste management team, the leaders of that team for that matter. And there began the adventure of the crazy idea, the crazy notion of reducing waste at a music arts festival. And it was not just a music arts festival, it's a transformational festival, really, because it was introduced into the whole idea of a music and arts festival were the vibe as well as the information about how to be more sustainable. All sorts of talks and workshops and discussions around sustainability, sustainable practices, wellness and health and wellness. And so I was very enamored by New Fire Festival. So I continue to be involved, and I continue to get the idea that festivals like that could be more green. I grew up in Trinidad. I have seen, but the biggest festival I know is Carnival. Gerry referred to Carnival as the biggest, and it is. It's very important and close to many Trinis. Even if you don't mass, it's part of our identity. And that, I have a dream of Carnival being just that. A whole bunch of people having a wonderful time with music and mass and performances with no rubbish in the road. And I know that's a dream. It's my dream. But there probably are a couple other people who have that dream too. And I think it's possible. Crazy, you think? I don't think so. I think it's doable. And it's doable because I believe that the experience of the Fire Festival showed that something as crazy as that is doable, because in a matter of 4 iterations of that festival, we got more focused each time, more pointed about the production of waste at a festival. And it came out of each of the team members introducing into their lives the whole notion of decreasing their carbon footprint through reducing the waste that they produce. And those team members who were able to really make changes in their lives and adopt new habits were able to have a real contribution to the ideas that we needed to put into the festival to achieve just that as a festival scale. So, and this is what we found this out in the first time we approached the whole zero waste messaging, and that's where the people in the team really got grounded in what needed to be done. The message of what zero waste meant for a festival was what we took on and sent out continuously before the festival. This really began, let's see, the New Fire Festival of 2017, the second one. It was important that the messaging got out there. For 2018, the messages were even more pointed, more focused, and there were more people on board in the team because they had started to develop behavior for themselves, change their habits to reduce more waste. And as the team became more informed about the challenges of doing that, the festival became more informed about how to really execute it. And so we learned that the secret is getting the message out there, getting the message out in a way that is consistent, pointed, simple, so that people go, oh, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to do. So for the festival, what were some of the ground rules? Come to the festival with something to put your drinks in. Come to the festival with something to put your food in. And it sounds stupid and simple, but that was it. That was it. And then, of course, we realized, okay, if we're asking people to come to the festival with something to put your food in, we have to create a way for them to be able to wash those things so they could buy more food for the whole weekend. And that's the having washers. So those were things that were put in. That's not in any festival. Nobody else doing that. Pioneer again. The Fire Festival pioneer in that. So habits had to be changed. So I think I'll stop now and hand over to Sean, and then we could start kind of a round robin on all this stuff we brought up. You want to take over, Sean?
Hi, yes. Good morning, or rather good afternoon, because it's past 12 already. I have been listening to each and every one, and I've noticed that we've all touched on the cultural aspects of greening, or at least we all seem to echo the sentiments of greening a festival being related to a behavioral change or a cultural change. Now, a very interesting term or phrase comes to mind when we have discussions such as these, which is culture eats policy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Yeah. And I think I see Denyssa is smiling from ear to ear, and Anne-Marie looks like he has heard this before. And that cannot be further from the truth, because right now, in not just Trinidad and Tobago, but regionally, this has been a challenge that we all grapple with. The culture and the cultural implications and aspects, eating all of these nice policies that we've come up with. Gerry had a very interesting discourse earlier when he spoke about how do we find an innovative way to incorporate our behavioral patterns into everyday practices that are sustainable. So I want to just open the floor before I continue for comment on that. Culture eats policy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. because I know we're supposed to be a lot more interactive, and I want to engage with this panel on your thoughts where that is concerned. And particularly in the Trinidad and Tobago context, I will comment a bit later on the Tobago context. But in Trinidad and Tobago, generally in your experience, how do you see that term as being more or less very, very instrumental in how we go forward in greening, not just festivals, but our everyday lives and activities? Denyssa, you wanna? Gerry, I think there's some difficulties. I'm seeing the enthusiasm on your face, but I'm not hearing the audio. So Denyssa, could you just comment in the meanwhile while Gerry gets that sorted?
Well, I don't know if I could think of a festival example, but growing up in Rio Claro and also having family in Mon Diablo in Pinal, collecting rainwater was a normal thing. You had to do it because you did not have pipe-borne water. And I only learned a few years ago that you're supposed to get a permit from Water Resources Agency in order to collect rainwater. So there is policy in place to sort of manage how we use our resources. But in communities where you do not have access to pipe-borne water, the culture is that you collect in those same steel drums that I would have mentioned, you collect in other barrels. And so that is the culture.
Right. So you see, in some cases, while culture eats policy for dinner, breakfast, lunch, whatever the case may be, whichever meal or snack we wish to make reference to, there are cultural practices that have been more or less sustainable, and they've been passed on from generation to generation. So my point is, in this instance, that sustainability is not foreign, or it's not alien to us as a civilization, to us as a society, and to us as Caribbean people. Sustainability through cultural practices and things that were passed down have actually been part and parcel of what we do. So now it's just a matter of bringing to bear or bringing to the forefront those sustainable practices that are already familiar to us. So that's one aspect of it. And Marie, you spoke about your experience with the New Fire Festival and how it is you saw a marked change in everybody's lives that contributed to making the New Fire Festival happen. So, Anne-Marie, tell us a little about your experience in how those very simple but yet important cultural practices that were passed down played a role in the discussions in planning for the New Fire Festival as a green or environmentally conscious festival.
Okay, well, that's a good question because I grew up in the suburbs in northwest Trinidad. A decidedly different environment than Rio Claro and Denyssa's upbringing. I didn't know anybody who collected rainwater except one or two who were doing gardening.
Right.
And I only heard about them that wasn't as a child. So growing up, I did not see anybody collecting rainwater. I did, however, see people. We weren't producing much waste back in the 60s and the 70s because plastic had not yet proliferated the marketplace as a way to package produce and products. People were still using pretty much glass bottles. The imported stuff, particularly imported personal care items and so on, those were in plastic. That really became more obvious in the 70s, later 70s. And the people who were involved with New Fire Festival planning came from a myriad of backgrounds. And generally speaking, they were much younger than me. And so they were in the generation that hadn't seen their grandparents do what I'd seen my grandparents do. And my parents. So what you were referring to, I think, I was a generation removed, and they were more or less born during the consumer culture, as Gerry mentioned. And so to see those youngsters who were genuine about taking on the zero challenge themselves were able to see exactly where the challenges were in their attempt to move ahead and try not to produce waste on a daily and weekly basis. The people who were involved in the little challenges that we set ourselves on social media just to promote the festival, Gerry had with this, to have a competition and post what you did to avoid producing waste. And people would post that they're taking their containers to the vendor to buy food that they usually buy in another kind of container, but they take a container from the house to go and buy their whatever, and they would post their pictures, and that was part of the promotion. But the people who are genuinely challenging themselves and pushing themselves to change that behavior said to me, hey, this is not that easy. It's changing habits a habit is something that you do unconsciously. You do it for so long that you don't have to think about it. So if you are undoing a habit, that's hard work. That's an intentional action. And so this is what I saw. People who were willing to undertake the intentional change of a habit were able to see results, but also understand the challenges. And so in understanding the challenges, they were able to support the waste management process at the festival, because they knew, okay, people need signs. People need some guidance. People need to know what to do and why they're doing it as well. Gerry talked about it, why we have to do it. And then the how to do it at the festival. And then people went away saying, okay, I did this over a weekend and I was camping. I could certainly do this as well. And
right, so Anne-Marie, just to interject and add to what you're saying, you mentioned I am so happy that you brought up the fact that we are now using modern means and mediums of communication to get messaging out. Now, I want to take that and bring it into education. And how is it partnerships and education can be made as playing a pivotal role, made to play a pivotal role rather, in how it is we green our spaces, green our festivals, green our events. Do you think partnerships are very important? I'll make reference to SDG 17, Sustainable Development Goal 17, which is sustainable partnerships. So in order to sustain ourselves as human beings and as a society, right, Gerry is saying something.
Right. So so it seems that I'm back on. My audio is back on. I guess the universe thought I spoke for too long at the beginning, so it kind of shut me out for a little bit. But since I'm back on, let me say what I want to. There was something I wanted to before I answer that question, or before any of us begin to tackle that question. Anne-Marie, what I wanted to mention is that it's important for us to remember that when we talk about historically our grandparents, etc., and our parents, being green in their practice, in their daily lives, we have to remember that was in an organic way, in that the products that are available now, and Anne-Marie touched on that, weren't available then, right? The plastics, right? The kind of disposable plastics that we utilize so ubiquitously in everything now, it wasn't available then. So they were practicing that in an organic way because it just wasn't available. And what has happened is that through time and becoming so accustomed, getting so accustomed to using these items now, that has replaced that old practice, right? So it's now a re-engineering. I think Denyssa must mention that. So re-engineering has to happen. But as you mentioned, education, right? And partnerships. What I'm thinking about is the role that corporate entities have to play in that partnership discussion, because for events to incorporate sustainable practices or environmentally responsible practices, we all know that events rely a lot on corporate partnerships, right?
Yes, of course.
I want to ask a question. What role do, okay, here's the point I'm trying to make is that traditionally, the vast majority of our corporate entities don't really respond to environmental issues. They don't really support, organizations and events that are, and I'm talking from my own experience here, that are really, with New Fire Festival, that is, that are pushing that agenda. So what role would you say in that whole partnerships thing, and how can we educate using, the corporate sector to start to support the thrust by events to become more sustainable? Who would want to, Denyssa, you want to take on that?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, it's important to be familiar with the language of your stakeholder. I said that, the dollars and cents need to make sense for them to really decide to increase expenditure on these things. There's a new approach that
corporate social responsibility, though. Corporate social responsibility isn't supposed to be about making monetary sense. It's not about things making sense in that kind of way. Corporate social responsibility is supposed to be an issue that the corporate sector, businesses find as worthwhile to kind of support it.
I think that's a very idealistic sentiment, Gerry. If you're running a business, most of our conventional businesses are about profit. And one of the things that I've been grappling with is, how do we rebuild a new system while still operating within the system? The reality of this system is that most of the companies we go to are not going to spend beyond their means, what they consider their means. And so I can't answer that question because I haven't been able to do it, but we have to be able to communicate how this makes sense for them. And one of the things that I have also been kind of toying with recently is the idea that the money that you give for these things is not a blight, is not a favor, is not kindness. It is to repair damage that institutions, capitalist institutions, have done to this earth. So while I may not be attacking individual organizations, I'm attacking culture that has placed us in this situation. And so for me, festivals provide an opportunity to correct this. And so when a corporate sponsor gives money, it is reparations, or it is in aid of repair of the damage that is done. But
we also have to be careful of that thing called greenwashing, yeah. That
right, Gerry. So that point
corporate TNT, I'm not going to. Sorry, Sean. I was just going to say, I don't think corporate TNT they need to see the connection between their damage and the environmental issue and the impact on their family. It has to be direct. They have to see a direct connection between themselves and the damage that has been done by their activities, or in general sense, in capitalist activities. We're dying from, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and cancer. I like to call those the big four that's killing us, right? And that is what the Ministry of Health recognized early o'clock. And that's why they were so on the ball in 2020. Because why? Because they have relatives and because they knew that they were vulnerable, and they have relatives who sick, just like we all have relatives who are afflicted with those I learned a word during the pandemic, comorbidities, right? I didn't know that word before. But those lifestyle illnesses that are making the population vulnerable to the effects of that virus, of the pandemic, the COVID-19. And they need to snug a connection between what they do and and the fact that those people are vulnerable because of what they have done. Can they see the connection? I don't know.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you, Anne-Marie. What I'm also thinking a workable approach to these corporate entities when you're citing corporate social responsibility would be this: a very simple bit of language that more or less invokes some sort of action on their part. Okay, so we all live in this world. We occupy this space together for whatever reason. Their own may be for profit, for capitalism, for whatever the case may be. If the earth is completely destroyed, not usable, you can't extract anything from it, you can't do anything, you can't function. There's no air to breathe. There's no water, there's no trees. This is the most basic or layman's approach you can give. All right. If the earth as we know it ceased to exist in the workable form that it currently stands as, then how are you as a corporate entity going to continue? How are you as a corporate entity going to sustain yourself? So without people, without the natural environment, and without money, as the case may be, you have nothing. So your approach should be to remind them that it is not only beneficial to the natural environment and saving the planet, as we all, kumbaya, we have this kumbaya approach at times, but it's a very, very raw and factual sort of basis you have to approach these people on, right? And outside of that, which comes to the more diplomatic approach, you have something called sustainable partnerships. Now, civil society, public sector, and private sector have a duty and responsibility in all their individual quarters to work together, because that is the only way we can progress. You find civil society groups, not-for-profit organizations, NGOs, such as my organization, Environment Tobago, Gerry, New Fire as well, Denyssa, yours as well. We are not-for-profit or not non-government organizations. And you find that our objectives are to add value to those that are around us. If you show that corporate social responsibility does not just rest primarily on give me a grant or give me a piece of money to do a festival, or let's have some sort of contribution to a festival, it also rests on being your brother's keeper. It may sound like a very, very far-fetched biblical sort of terminology, or something even partially religious, which it's not. But planet Earth and the environment, the natural environment, relies on us. And if each sector can come forward and recognize how important their role is, it goes a long way. So reminding the civil society sector partners, the corporate partners, and the public sector partners, which is on a governance level, of course, if we remind them how important they are in getting to the objectives, and in this case, which is to green our operations, green our festivals, and green our cultural output, you will find that your life is made a lot easier. Yes, there are challenges. Yes, there are developmental things that we come in as gaps and hurdles to get over and so on. But it is doable. It is doable. You just, as Denyssa rightly put it, understanding the stakeholder that you're speaking to, understanding what language resonates with them. And I think once we tailor our messaging and the language, which again comes back to education, so on each level and each spectrum or sector of our society, we can now tailor the language or the messaging to meet that entity on a level that they find relatable. Yeah, what do you think about that, Anne Marie? I see you might have a comment on that.
Well, the fact is that the planet doesn't need the human beings. The planet doesn't need the human beings to regenerate itself. We need the planet for the very breath we breathe. There's nothing else producing oxygen for us to breathe in. You know that? Do they know that? Do people know that? So long before the planet it becomes non-functioning as a planet, at least in the way we know it, we would have long gone away. We would not be able to survive. We'd be dead, as we say. You can't be dead 3 times. Dead is dead. That will be gone. So humans, it's humankind. You are looking after humankind when you look after the environment. You are providing yourself with oxygen. You are providing yourself with nutrients and food and water. We need that to live. That's the very basics of our life is required, is fulfilled by the plants on this planet and the rest of the planet. Everything that is natural and natural, we need it to survive. End of story. It's very simple. That's it. Nothing complicated.
So basically, we are facing a kind of catch-22 situation, if this is one, where we're saying on one hand that, in order for event organizers to be able to make their events more, to get buy-in from event organizers, they would have to see the monetary value, right, so to speak, or it has to make dollars and cents to them, right? But we know that traditionally events are supported by corporate entities. That's how any event person is going to tell you that's how they make most of their money. It's through corporate sponsorship. But if the corporate entities don't buy into that concept, of supporting that, then they don't get the funds. But we need the events to themselves to also be the channels through which the public is educated on the importance of the environmental issues. So we have a difficult situation there. But let us not focus on that at the moment. Let's use the next few minutes to kind of discuss, touch on what are the beginning steps that events that you think for both Anne Marie, I think Anne Marie, in fact, all three of you can probably speak on this because Chris, you could also talk about your own experience with Friendship Festival. But I want to ask, I'll ask Denyssa first. What are the first things that you think event organizers can incorporate that wouldn't cost them anything? That wouldn't cost them anything. It's just simple things that they can start implementing to make their festivals, their events more responsible.
Well, one thing I would say is don't hang your hat where your hand can't reach. And
right.
the issue of greening a festival or an event can seem like a mammoth task. But when I shared earlier, I would have spoken about using Sahari leaves as plates and different things. And I think it's important to tap into the indigenous knowledge and be guided by that and to improve on that. So there are existing examples of how we can be more, I would say, eco-sensitive in the way we execute festivals and events. So partnering, I think, with people who have done the same is important. I think having all stakeholders have that mutual exchange is important because we all have expertise in different areas. And environmental organizations and organizations like my own Global Villages, I think we really need to task ourselves with the responsibility of sharing the information with artists, with decorators, with event planners, because as I said, they don't do because they simply don't know. So I think you start small and collaborate with organizations that know how to do it. The TT Bridge Initiative has the experience, Global Villages has the experience, Friendship Festival. So we need to make ourselves more available to organizers to be able to guide them. And not in a way, as I said, that is imposing, but simply presenting alternatives for consideration.
Right. And Anne-Marie being one of the persons who have been very important in, driving New Fire's, how to say, the practices that we have developed. Anne-Marie, can you talk about some of the practices that you would say event organizers can incorporate? It doesn't cost any money. They can get going on becoming great.
Well, maybe just to take a page out of the book of New Fire Festival and try some of the things that they saw we do. So what we did, developing a relationship with the vendors who you invite to your event, and coming up with a way for the food service to be less waste generating. Coming up with again, it starts with the messaging of the event. So you might want to encourage the patrons to come with reusable containers and that kind of thing, and something to put drinks in, and then really with the vendors about, hey, let's make this possible. Don't use your styrofoam cups. Let's have the patron present you with their cup to buy whatever it is, ice cream, soup, whatever, smoothies, etc. There are a number of ways to intervene in the waste generation of a festival, and I think that's the easiest place that people could stick themselves in to really effect a big change, a noticeable change in what is generated at any kind of large event. That has a lot of people, and there's food and drink being sold and a lot of exchange of merchandise. So there's going to be waste. Let's see how we can reduce that by making an intervention in the packaging of that stuff. That's just one. And I mean, once you're going there are other ways it will present itself. In the interest of anybody else?
Yeah.
So that.
All right. So
easiest to intervene.
What I would like
one
to
person
add
at
to
a time,
that,
Sean.
Yes. What I would like to add to that is here in Tobago, the natural environment, as it were, is a little more integrated into the way festivals, cultural occasions, cultural events are executed. I think a very important pillar of the way the Friendship Festival developed and started in the first instance was through an appreciation for the natural environment. So having said that, I know we are wrapping up, so to speak, this session. I know that the natural environment plays a very pivotal role in the way we do things here in Tobago. If that sort of thinking and that sort of direction in the planning and development of festivals and cultural events in Trinidad can occur, you would see a completely different approach into the way the entire thing comes off. Now, because here in Tobago and through the tourism product and downstream economic activities is relying on the natural environment, you see an added form of importance or added kind of importance placed on that aspect. So I think there should be emphasis placed on the actual natural environment and the things therein and the products that come out of the natural environment. If that approach is taken, in my opinion, and based on experience, we can actually make some noteworthy progress in greening festivals and cultural output.
Right. What I want to say is that we have to bear in mind and that what we are doing here is pretty much pioneering. We haven't had to make events green before. So the work that we have all been doing, has been pioneering work. in this space, in this region. And I think it was Anne-Marie who rightly said, and Sean spoke about, you all spoke about partnerships, about entities seeking out those who have been pioneering, who have been developing some local expertise, so to speak, some level of practice, so that they can help to guide. Maybe it might be that in the early stage, event organizers can reach out to us, any of us here, and contract us, to help to shape the greening sort of direction and all of that. So yes, rightly, I think that reaching out to those entities that have been pioneering in this work to assist in developing the plans, for events becoming more environmentally responsible. There was one point I really liked and I wanted to really emphasize. Right, it was Denyssa. You said, you mentioned it first, how important it is that event organizers get on board with this, or introduce, I should say, the intention, to make their event more environmentally responsible very early on, so that there is enough time to get the important things like Anne-Marie stressed on, the messaging, right, which is key to making it successful, to having success in making the event more green, is getting the messaging there out very early. So those 2 points that both of you raised, they go well with each other, in that the only way you could get the messaging if you get the messaging in time and get it into the minds of the patrons, is to start early. So start very early, and also give yourself time to work the plans that might be developed to Green the Festival. We have very limited time left. Any closing remarks from each of you? Denyssa, you go first. I'm seeing you on top of the screen.
Well, we don't have time left, but I would just like to thank you all for engaging in this conversation with me and really sparking some new ideas in my mind. And I just want to reiterate that we can make ourselves available for those who wish to green their festivals, or even small things. So yeah, we welcome that kind of collaboration.
Sean, you next.
Okay, thank you for having us, and we look forward to continuing discussions such as these. I think it's very useful, and it serves to inspire some kind of confidence in our ability as a country and as a nation to go forward with initiatives such as these.
Anne-Marie?
Yeah, and I'll just close. Thank you. I'll just close by saying it is entirely doable. Habits and greening festivals. It's entirely doable. That's my closing contribution.
This was my first experience moderating a panel, and it's such a massive subject to really begin to really contemplate and discuss, right? And I don't think that even the hour and a half, given that we had some technical difficulties and started a bit late, it will never be anywhere close to being enough time to even begin to scratch the surface of how important it is that we transform, behaviors, transform our culture towards becoming more environmentally responsible, more sustainable. So I would like to suggest that maybe outside of this, and I want to thank MusicTT absolutely for giving us this space to discuss this. It's very important, and really appreciative of this being included in this reverb experience. But I want to suggest that maybe we can even begin our own series of discussions where we invite people to learn further from us. Yeah. So thank you guys. Thank you, my fellow panelists. Sean has left. Thank you so much. It was wonderful, and we're going to continue this work. So thank you.